Alright, welcome back. We got to see how to combine Final Gather and Global Illumination, put them together to create a really good render. Now we're going to look at another feature of Mental Ray. Mental Ray has another feature that works with photons, just like Global Illumination, but this feature is a little bit different. This feature creates realistic caustic effects. So what are caustics? Well, if you're not familiar with the term, don't worry about it. Caustics is basically that sort of light shimmering effect that you see, say, at the bottom of a pool. Or if there's a very bright light in a room, say at a dinner in a dinner room, and there's a dinner table and there's maybe a glass of wine or some kind of clear glass and anything like that, or a vase or anything like that, and the light hits it and creates this sort of specular reflection on a table that'll look like this very strong highlight. Kind of like if you take a magnifying glass and just shine a strong light through it, or when the light from the sun goes into a magnifying glass and you can see it concentrated on the ground as a very bright light spot. Okay, and sometimes people can get kind of annoying and take a shiny lighter and bounce the light from the sun at, say, a football game and point that light at somebody's face and really blind them and annoy them. That's also a caustic effect. Okay. Alright, so how can we do that? Let's open up an example scene here. And the example scene we want to open up is called 07 Scene, Caustics Start. So let's go ahead and open that one up. Don't save that untitled scene. So this is what we have. Let's do an IPR here real quick. It's a pretty simple scene setup. We have sort of this background here, a wall and a floor. We have this vase here with a couple of stems from a plant inside of it. Kind of hard to see from here. And then we have this sphere. And that sphere is actually, if I go ahead and open up the attribute editor, it's just an area light that's been converted to a Mental Ray area light. Okay, and the shape has been changed from the default, which is rectangle, to a sphere to create some nice lighting. Okay, has some linear decay and an intensity of 15, so on and so forth. Nothing very special there about the light. Now, if I go back and look at the attribute editor and I look at the Mental Ray options here for caustic and global illumination, if you remember, we have global illumination photons down here, and then we have caustic photons. And earlier in this tutorial, when I was going over this section of parameters, I skipped over the caustic photons and I said, don't worry about that for now, we'll talk about that later. Well, later's now, and we're going to talk about that right now. Okay, so let me close that. What caustics do, caustics are photons that come from the light and they hit objects. If an object can cause any type of high-powered specular reflection, say like a shiny vase like this, or a mirror, or some kind of transparent object that concentrates and refracts light rays, then you can rest assured that you'll be able to spot a caustic light effect if it's set up in Mental Ray for Maya correctly. So that's what we're going to focus on in this video. We're going to first set it up, and then we're going to talk about the settings to tweak and control caustics. Now, the way you work with caustics is pretty simple. All you have to do is turn caustics on for a light. So if I take this light, open up its attribute editor, and I turn on emit from photons, it'll automatically start casting caustic photons, because photons work with caustics and global illumination. The only difference, let me turn that back off for the moment. The only difference is that if I go to the render settings, go to indirect lighting, and I go down here, let me collapse Final Gathering again. If I go down here, I see I have global illumination, so I'll turn it off. And I have caustics. I can turn that on. And as long as caustics is turned on here and the photon parameters for the light are turned on here, you'll be using caustics. But there's something else too. Objects in your scene have to work with caustics. They have to be set as casters and receivers of caustics, just like with global illumination photons. Now, fortunately, Maya does that for us automatically by default. So we don't have to worry about that third step. Just number 1 and 2. Okay? So let's zoom in here. Let's do an IPR here real quick with this vase. And let's see. Doesn't look too great. Now you can see it's transparent because of the way that the shadows from the area light are coming through. But for some reason, it just looks black and we can't see through it. Why is that happening? Well, that's happening because we have to increase the ray tracing settings are not set up correctly. So let's go ahead and set that up now. Let's go to render settings And what I'll do is I'll go to quality, and in quality I'll go down to the ray tracing parameters down here, and you can see that it's set to ray tracing reflections of 1, refractions of 1, and a max depth of 2. That's not going to work. So what I'm going to have to do is change these settings. What I'm going to do to make sure that everything works out just fine, and this may seem kind of crazy, but I'm just going to go ahead and increase this to 10, 10, and 20. And that's going to make sure everything works very nicely. And the shadows I'm going to increase to 6. Okay. Then I'm going to close that. And now let's go ahead and let's do another IPR here. And there we go. Now the ray tracing is working correctly, and now my glass vase over here is interacting with my lighting in a correct fashion, which is exactly what I want. Now very quickly here, let's turn on caustics for this light up here. Let's open up its attribute editor. Let's turn on emit photons. Let me go ahead and hit copy tab. I'll close the original attribute editor there. I'll just minimize it. Open up the render settings. Go to indirect lighting, and we'll turn on caustics. Close this. I'll open up the attribute editor again, and I'll go back down to mental ray over here, collapse area light, and under caustic and global illumination, I'm going to be making some adjustments to the settings there. So let's do an IPR. Let's render out this whole area here. It's emitting the photons right now. There we go. We can see there's no caustic effect right now because it's not bright enough. So we'll have to increase this photon intensity here to a very high number. Let's go to something like 20,000. Let's see it update. Okay. If you notice, things got a little bit brighter right in front here. That's because these caustic photons are bouncing off of here and causing a sort of specular reflection right there against the ground. Okay, but this isn't going to look good. And if we keep increasing the photon intensity, it's still not going to look very good. Why is that? That's because the distance of this light to this vase in intensity is just not going to work out. It's not going to create a great caustic effect. So what I'm going to do instead is I'm going to go up to create lights, and I'm going to create a spotlight. And I'm going to take this spotlight I just created, I'm going to move it and place it right about here. I'm going to rotate it so it's pointing right at the vase. And I'm going to place it about here, maybe rotate it downward so it's pointing down like that. And I guess about right there is pretty good. Okay, that way the caustic photons will just shoot from the spotlight and hit this object from pretty close, which is going to create a more defined, more pronounced, and better looking caustic effect for this scene. So what I'm going to do is make this light cast the photons, but this light will cast the direct lighting in the scene. So I'm going to turn emit photons off for that light, for the area light up here. And I'm going to take this spotlight right here, open up its attribute editor, and what I want to do is take the intensity and put it down to 0. That way I essentially turn the light off. I don't want this light to cast any lighting in my scene. I don't want it to project shadows, anything. I just want to go to mental ray options here, and I want to have it emit photons, caustic photons. Okay, so let's go ahead and let's do a render of this. And now you can see we have a sort of caustic effect right down here. Okay, you can clearly see it now. It's pretty bright. What I'm going to do is reduce the brightness of the caustic effect by coming here to the photon intensity and just reducing that. So I'm going to reduce it by about half, make it 4,000, and I'm going to do a render region right there in that area. There we go. Alright, so it's a little bit more manageable. I'm also going to change the photon color to green. That way it's easier to see the photon effect. Let me do this by IPR instead. That way it automatically updates. Okay, there we go. You can clearly see the caustics right there in front of the vase. Looks pretty interesting. Let's increase the amount of caustic photons to about 50,000. Now you can see the photons are looking a little bit better, and you can see a sort of rim of light right back over there. And what I'm going to do instead is I'm going to zoom my camera in a little bit more, make this effect a little bit more more apparent, easier to see. There we go. That's pretty easy to see. Good thing we can change the caustic color to anything we want, so it's very, very easy to see. Now, let me increase the amount of caustic photons to 100,000. Take a little bit longer to render, but not too much. Not too bad. That's not too bad. So we can see a nice caustic effect right there. If I increase the brightness of this to say 6,000 instead of 4,000, might be able to see it's just a little bit better. Okay, that's not too bad. So we can see a rim of light out here in this outer edge. And we could see also some light behind the vase right there. And what's controlling the shape? What's controlling the look of this caustic effect in terms of when it comes to the shape, not the color? Well, the object that actually controls that is the vase itself. Let me close that. Let me select the vase, and the attribute editor automatically changed. So let me go to the glass material, which is applied to the vase. And what we can do is come down here to the refraction section here of this material. By the way, this is using the MIA material. So basically the mental ray architectural material is being used here, which is a very physically accurate, realistic render. And it's great for doing things like glass. And you can see the settings that I used here. For refraction, I changed the index of refraction to about 1.52. That's just an index of refraction that I found in a Google search of typical glass. Now, different types of glass, different types of materials have different indices of refraction. Check that. Edit that video. Do that again. 3, 2, 1. Different types of glass, different types of materials in the real world all have a different type of index of refraction. In this case, my glass material has 1.52, and that actually controls the shape of the caustic effect. So if I come here to the caustic effect, do a quick render region here, notice the way that the shape of the caustic effect looks. We have this outer rim here, and then we have this strong part here that kind of falls off and blends in right there. Let me save that image. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to change the index of refraction to something like, say, 1.1. It's going to render out a different shape to the caustic effect, as you can see. Now we get this different caustic effect that has this sort of sharp line right here, which looks very interesting in my opinion. Looks great, actually. Let me try something like 1.2. Alright, that looks very, very interesting. Looks great. So you can see how you could change the caustic effect based on the index of refraction of the object. Okay? And this object has a transparency of 1 to make it completely transparent like glass. That's what I was going for. And pretty much all the other settings are okay. Now there is one important setting here, the BRDF setting. Okay? I have it set to use Fresnel reflection. Basically what that means is if you have this use Fresnel reflection option turned on, what it means is that the index of refraction is going to be determined right here by whatever you put. If I turn that off and it renders again, you notice that the index of refraction changed. Now it's behaving totally differently. That's because the index of refraction is being controlled by these parameters here. The degree of reflection for both the facing angle as well as the perpendicular angle, and also the BRDF curve. So these parameters are controlling it. But I want the Fresnel reflection to control it. That way the index of refraction up here is in control of it, and I can actually plug in numbers from the real world to imitate and create realistic glass. Okay? Realistic glass caustic effects. Alright, so let's try a value of about maybe 1.3 for the index of refraction. See what we end up with. That's a pretty neat, pretty interesting effect. Let's try 1.4. That's pretty interesting in itself too. I'll go ahead and leave it at 1.4. You can use whatever index of refraction you like. So I'm going to leave it at that, and I'm going to close that. Okay, so we got the caustic effect working pretty good, pretty nice. If we look at our render settings, for caustics we have a few different parameters here that we can use and control to edit the caustic effect. But we're not going to go over that right now. We'll go over some of this stuff in the next video. So I'm going to end this video here, and in the next one I'll pick up where I left off here and continue and wrap up caustics with Mental Ray and Maya.